Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, all protocol have been established and the time being limited. I think I'll follow my previous panelist and go straight into my presentation. Today is the 24th of April. It happens to be World Intellectual Copyright and Book Day, by the way. Yesterday was the 23rd of April, and in France they had the first round of the presidential election. There was a real fear that Madame Le Pen from the far right might have gotten the most votes. Unfortunately for us, she came second. And the person who won, if you like, the first round was Mr. Macron, who got about 4 points more than her. The expectation is that on the second round, on the 7th of May, Mr. Macron should get about 68% because everybody on the left will vote for Mr. Macron, as well as the center-right candidates, and the people will vote for him at the expectation. She has no natural allies among the established parties. So that's put a sense of relief to me personally, because I know one of the attractions of the CBI program is the fact that Dominica has managed to negotiate visa-free entry through the Schengen area. And her proposal was to not only take France out of the European Union, but also, as part of that, to dismantle the Schengen arrangements. In terms of, back to Dominica now, in terms of current trends, well, heard Lennox's historical argument about the development of Dominica over the years, and the fact that the last real export agricultural crop that was of significance was the bananas, which has since collapsed practically, and our export efforts have been placed on tourism. So that's the recent trend in the private sector mostly. And we will remember, or we ought to know, that we have been trying to do this since the 1990s when the Freedom Party government realized that the banana business really was dying and had no future, attempted to get us into the tourism stream. Unfortunately, that hasn't quite worked out yet, because among other things, if we look at the statistics, we will see that since 2004 at least, the number of people looking for paid serviced accommodation has been about 33,000 persons, which has been about 40% of the stayover tourists, and in 2014, we had only 31,872 stayover tourists looking for a hotel, guest house, apartment, or whatever furnished accommodation, which, to say the other way around, some 60% or more of the tourists who come to Dominica stay at private homes. The government, through the CBI program, is expecting to build, or have built by private developers, a number of hotels around the island, on the south and the north, and particularly in the north of the island. The Discover Dominica Authority has some projections about increasing arrivals. And when you look at the two things, you will see that the expected increase in rooms outstrips the expected increase in arrivals. The DDA has gross figures about the numbers of persons who will come as tourists, but they haven't said how that will be shared up between those who stay in private homes and those who live at serviced accommodations like hotels, guest houses, etc. Unless we can get the number of people who are looking for a hotel or guest house to come to Dominica as tourists, our occupancy rates will remain as low as they are in the 30% or so bracket. And I think in terms of the needs of the tourism industry, the Prime Minister in July or thereabouts made available $15 million for upgrade and refurbishment of properties. However, most properties that were built in the 1990s, a lot of them were built and financed from the aid bank. And at a 30% average occupancy, most properties have not been able to service their loans. And I think in terms of, you might say, equity, and on one hand, it would be useful if the government would use some of the CBI money, not only as has been done in terms of upgrading the facilities that are there, but also to alleviate the debt that the present owners of properties have. The rates of interest that the owners of properties are paying is somewhere between as high as 10%. They refinance some down to 7.5 and 8%. But those rates of interest are inconsistent with the conditions of the tourism industry as it is now, and the expectation of how fast it will grow up till the end of this planning period for tourism in 2022. And I think it would be useful if the government would use about, I think the amount that's owed to the aid bank by the properties of a tourism portfolio for some $43 million, to take some of the CBI money and help to refinance the loans at the rate of 3%. Even before the Prime Minister had put the $15 million at the rate of 3%, I had made a calculation and I wrote to the bank some years ago to tell them that the rate that we should be charged is really 3%, because the conditions in which the industry is operating is 3% is the rate that can be comfortably managed by the properties. Now, there is a good reason why we ought to do both things, to say upgrade the properties as well as relieve the debt. If the debt is not relieved, that means the possibility of a number of properties going out of business completely, or their plant deteriorating so much that they essentially it simply closes, not because the bank seizes you, but because you simply get no clients. And I think the fact that the properties are actually operating means that not only do they keep some people employed in a situation where unemployment is rather high. I'm not sure what the latest figures are, but we know that employment is a bit of a difficulty to acquire, which is why we have the National Employment Program, which specifically targets the younger persons in the society to try to get them into the workforce, at least for experience, so that they hopefully can gain a proper job after that. The properties that are in existence also, of course, have some clients, so they have some bills which they pay. They pay electricity bills, they pay telephone bills, we pay our workers, as you said, we contribute to Social Security Fund, etc. So it's not only useful for the owners of the properties that the financing of the old loans, let's just call them so, be reorganized and refinanced at about 3%, because it's not only the benefits the owners of the properties, but because the properties spend money on services and goods within the society, they help to generate economic activity and keep the economy ticking along, even if they themselves are not making much of a profit or making no profit at all. And second thing I would like to say is in terms of the use of the CBI funds. I looked at the GDP and how it's deconstructed, and I noticed, if you'll notice if you look at it, that one of the biggest drivers of the GDP in Dominica is education, particularly private education. And public education's contribution is starting to decline because the population is, school children are declining, but private education is going up steadily. And I think the government, and more particularly the Ministry of Finance, should consider that we should deliberately go after expanding the number of universities we have in Dominica, because education is a thing that everybody in the world is looking out for, so that we could have 3 or so more universities built in Dominica. And we can do that by the government giving the right incentives. For example, I understand the All Saints University is going to move from Roseau to Warner to build a campus there, which means that the facilities we didn't now operate and use will become vacant. So that could be used as an incentive to investors who want to invest in education facilities to come and set up universities there. They will operate there for 2, 3 years, 4, 5 years, or what the case might be. Then they move to selected areas across the country and set up. That would, well, economists say that that is a capital export, a services export, capital service export, which is considered generally to be more beneficial than consumer service export like tourism. And I would urge the government to look into that and to see how they could use some of the CBI money and the contacts which we've made with people abroad at different universities so that we could set up, I think, 3 more universities, which provide better jobs, higher paying jobs than the tourism business. And within that context, of course, the Ministry of Education should begin some manpower planning to see how we are going to prepare our people in Dominica to take as many of these jobs that are available. Thank you.